My earliest memory of Silent Hill was from when I was around 8 years old, at school. My parents didn't buy me the game when it first came out, but around that time I distinctly remember hearing some kids talking about some terrifying new game for the PlayStation. This was back in the golden age of gaming too, around that late 90s, early 2000s period when classics were coming in thick and fast for the PS1 and Nintendo 64 and heck, even the Game Boy Color and then the PS2. And what better time to experience such a golden age than when you were a kid at school, talking about cool new games with your mates. It was rather an enchanting time when the games industry was perhaps at its most exciting, long before things would turn quite as jaded and cynical as they are these days. Or maybe it just seemed enchanting because I was still young and still had some semblance of a hairline. In any case, one of the most exciting genres to talk about when you're a kid has to be the horror genre, when you're still emotionally vulnerable enough to get easily spooked by some zombie, monster or ghost, or whatever the hell else. And what better way to build the anticipation for some new horror game than to hear your buddies talk about it. I remember listening with dread-tinged fascination at recounts of the zombie-filled mansion from Resident Evil 1 and the nightmarish creatures from the game Nightmare Creatures. And hearing all these stories used to make me so desperate to play all this stuff so that I could experience firsthand what they were describing. But there was one day when I heard about some new horror game that sounded odd. In fact, even its name sounded really odd. Silent Hill. It was such a calm, understated name for a horror game, which was itself really intriguing, and the more I heard my pals talk about it, the more intrigued I became. We were still just kids, mind you, so it's not like I was getting all that much sense out of them. The game doesn't have the most straightforward of plots, but words like fog, knife-wielding children, flying monsters, rotten demonic dogs, etc, etc. Well, I guess these were words that appealed to little 8-year-old me. A little bit worrying, actually, looking back on it. Another very common thing back in those days, and something you never hear about these days, was chipped PlayStations, where you can get your console altered so that it could play games that someone had just copied onto a disc. Super cheap. Illegal, but cheap. Not sure how big this was in America, but it was extremely common in the UK for the PS1, and then mostly died out when the PS2 came out. This was actually how I got most of my games as a kid, especially at car boot sales. Again, don't know if Americans know what I'm talking about there, but a car boot sale is an organised event where you and others would park your car in a space and sell your old stuff from the boot of your car, hence the term car boot sale. And indeed, one day whilst rummaging through dog-eared Stephen King novels, now that's what I call music CDs, and all manner of other miscellaneous household tat, I chanced upon a copy of Silent Hill. "Hark!" I exclaimed as an 8-year-old. "The day cometh." I could barely contain my excitement to get home, pop the disc in my PS1 and get playing, though I certainly felt a fair degree of nervousness too. The stuff I'd been hearing about sounded pretty scary. I could scarcely even hold the CD case without it being inadvertently hurled asunder due to the intensity with which my hands were trembling. The cat was disgusted. The cat turned to me and said, "I thought I was supposed to be the pussy." Yeah, good one, you dumb cat. Well, I did put the game in, and I played, but I didn't get all that far. I was thoroughly disturbed by how quiet it was, and by the thick fog preventing forward visibility, and the sight of the little girl running away into the fog, and the gory mess greeting you upon entering into the alley, then those alarming camera angle transitions, followed by things going full nightmare mode with darkness and spinning wheelchairs and blood-splattered gurneys and mutilated corpses, and oh my god, I'm being chased by a bunch of grey, knife-wielding child-sized monsters. And by this point, even the cat had stopped talking shit. If truth be told, I didn't get much further on than this, though from time to time afterwards I'd stick Silent Hill back in the old PS1 and give it another shot, usually getting a bit further ahead each time before inevitably getting stuck somewhere then giving up. In fact, until about a week ago, I'd never actually gotten further than the Otherworld version of the school, which is only about a third of the way into the game, so not that far at all really. Then, at some point I got a PS2 and sold my chipped PS1 and lost access to Silent Hill entirely. I'd later go on to absolutely love Silent Hill 2 and really enjoy the third game as well, but that first game remained but a distant memory for a long time. However, I happen to now have a YouTube channel where I make fun videos about great games, and Silent Hill's 25th anniversary is just around the corner, so I thought, hey, what better time to revisit that old, disturbing classic, one of the most influential and impactful horror games ever made. And here we are. As for the format of this video, I'll be covering the game in a linear fashion, discussing and analysing the levels, mechanics, characters, story and more, from the beginning of our character Harry Mason's journey to its end. If you like the video, hey, why not subscribe to the channel? I plan to put out more retrospectives on classic games every week or two, perhaps even for Silent Hill 2, 3 and 4. And lastly, before I get stuck right in, please allow me to give a massive thanks to my kind patrons for their support for the channel. And with that being said, let's get into it. Although Silent Hill's plot is considerably deep and detailed, the actual plot setup is somewhat minimal and even simple, gradually gaining depth as the game progresses. Our character is Harry Mason, who wakes up in his wrecked vehicle in a town blanketed by extremely thick fog, except as he quickly notes, his daughter Cheryl is absent from the car. The intro cutscene doesn't show it, but if you watch the cinematic which leads into the title screen, you can actually see Harry and Cheryl travelling along a road before a vision of a small girl appears, causing Harry to veer off the road. Perhaps the thing Silent Hill is most known for is its fog effect, serving as both an important visual feature thematically and masking the poor draw distance capabilities of the PS1. At a couple of points later on in the game, the fog effect gets replaced by a darkness effect, which actually looks significantly worse, exposing the terrain ahead of Harry chunk by chunk, which I guess was the best they could do back then without the fog. You can have a look around this small starting section, but the only information to be gleaned is that there's no one around, your car is trashed, and the way out is completely blocked off, though getting out is the last thing on Harry's mind right now anyway, because he has to find his daughter, Cheryl. We get a brief glimpse of her amidst the fog, but she runs off, just fast enough so that you cannot catch up, though she does lead you to a side lane of garages and onto the entrance to an alley. The game's aura thus far is very ghostly and creepy and indistinct, but not overly threatening yet, but the sign at the entrance saying "Beware of Dog" might raise your guard a wee bit. But then you transition into the next area and are greeted by an ambiguous pile of gore whose origin cannot even be discerned. It's a really cool technique where the game creeps you out, alarms you with a warning of an unrecognisable entity, then immediately after hits you with some extreme, unrecognisable imagery, intestines and all. There's no danger yet in this immediate area, but you could be forgiven for thinking there was, especially when the camera angle starts transitioning and shifting as if there's a chase sequence going on, except there's not. Well, not yet anyway, because the building of threat and tension is far from done. In the next area, conditions get darker still, now being accompanied by a crescendoing dirge of sirens and ever more disturbing imagery, with a broken wheelchair and then a blood-stained gurney. These two objects might seem like random horror assets that the developers placed here to render the player thoroughly unnerved, especially if they're 8. But there actually is some significance to them in regard to this story. In fact, there's a lot of significance to a lot of this game's smaller details, which you're very unlikely to pick up on until subsequent playthroughs. The alley just gets more dark and bloody as you progress through it, and the music grows more urgent, before several mumbling mole creatures emerge from the darkness, grabbing and swiping at Harry until he collapses to the ground, seemingly dead. Of course, if you were from North America, it wasn't these things you've seen here at all, but rather weird grey children wielding knives, which was apparently deemed too outrageous for the rest of the world. Funnily enough, even though I'm from the UK, when I played my chipped copy of the game as a kid, it was the North American version of the game on the disc, and so I actually saw the grey children here, not the moles. In either case, this is a scripted death, the only one in the game actually, and Harry suddenly wakes up in a cafe, being watched over by a policewoman called Sybil Bennett. It's not actually explained how Harry managed to survive getting savaged in that alley either. It's kind of written off as a nightmare, but we do go on to explore several similarly nightmarish locations later on in the game where Harry doesn't just wake up after dying, so I'm not sure what's different about this first time. Maybe the implication is that Sybil rescued him, but that just doesn't seem all that likely to me. She makes no mention of the rescue here, and for most of the game she remains surprisingly skeptical about all the supernatural elements around her, thinking that drugs and or hallucinations have to be the cause. There is actually a drug abuse side story which runs through the game. Harry doesn't mention it here, but this isn't technically his first encounter with Sybil. If you watch the opening cinematic, you can see her riding her motorcycle along the same road as Harry, but the two even exchange looks before she speeds off, though just ahead we see her motorcycle lying at the side of the road, with her perhaps having saw a similar vision as Harry, especially seeing as how they both end up in the same place and are two of the very few normal people left in Silent Hill. It's here that Harry reveals that he and his daughter came here on vacation. Silent Hill is a resort town after all, though as we later find out, it wasn't a mere urge for some pretty scenery that drew them to this remote town in Maine, but a far darker force. Although Sybil is a resident of Silent Hill, she doesn't know any more about what's going on than Harry does, but gives him a gun all the same. Hey, thanks lady. Also, have to mention it, but the voice acting isn't what I'd call tremendous. Of course, voice acting in games, and especially horror games in general, wasn't great throughout this era, and nor would it be fantastic in the subsequent Silent Hill games, but it honestly sounds pretty amateurish in the first game. Here are some fun examples.
You from around here? Why don't you tell me what happened?
The dead will walk and martyrs will burn in the fires of hell.
There was no place for her to go. The road has been obliterated.
The demon taking that child's form.
I guess it kinda has a certain shitty charm to it, but the plot of Silent Hill is really dark and sadistic and serious, and at times the way the lines are delivered kind of undermines that. That being said, I do have a soft spot for Lisa.
There's a waterworks over by my old elementary school. It's been abandoned for years.
But then at the other end of the spectrum of quality, there's Dahlia, who sounds straight up bad. Anywho, Sybil leaves Harry to see about calling in some reinforcements. She encourages Harry to stay in the cafe to try and remain safe, but of course his daughter's missing, which means hanging around here is out of the question. Though as we quickly see, the cafe turns out to not be all that great a safe haven anyway. As Harry moves to leave, the nearby radio cracks into life, emitting that oh so familiar stream of white noise, a cacophonous ringing, heralding imminent danger as a winged creature bursts through the window, which marked the first time in over 20 years where I got to try out Silent Hill 1's combat, and it went really well. Suffice to say, my transition back into this game's combat did not go smoothly. Just outside in the town proper, and then in every level from then on, you'll be seeing monsters, and a lot of them, meaning a lot of fighting. For some reason, I had it in my head that the first couple of Silent Hill games were a little bit more conservative in their frequency and distribution of combat encounters, with more focus on tension, space, and silence. But after playing through this game, no. You'll often find yourself dealing with a lot of monsters, both indoors and out. Not an unreasonable amount, mind you, but plenty, especially if you have a go on hard mode like I did on my second playthrough. Back to how it feels though, I initially thought this was going to be a case of going back to an old game that's well regarded, or that you have fond memories of, and then you actually try and move your character and it feels dreadful. The game is 25 years old, let's not forget. But the more I played, the more in tune with the controls I felt. It's tank controls of course, but Henry is a wee bit more mobile than I expected. He can step to the left, and then a step to the right. He can put his hands on his hips, and bring his knees in tight. All that's kinda standard, but I was pleasantly surprised to see you can pull a 180 and even perform a back step. It's basically Dark Souls. Furthermore, you can even perform all these actions while wielding most weapons, which is very good, because enemies are also surprisingly mobile. We're attacked by a flying creature in the cafe, but if you thought that this was going to be our only encounter with one of these things, think again, Buster, because they're fucking everywhere. Silent Hill is lousy with these things, which I'll refer to as air screamers from here on, and they can be not great, especially as a first enemy. For a start, they can fly. By this quality's very nature, it makes them difficult to hit, and especially difficult to not get hit by, particularly when you take into consideration that they're the fastest enemy in the game, from what I could tell. Pretty much every outdoor enemy is fast, like dogs, or the ape-like creatures which appear from around the midpoint of the game onwards, but they're still a bit slower than Harry, meaning that he can outrun them when running in a straight line, though also meaning that attempting to turn mid-run has to be done with great care because it gives pursuing enemies a chance to land an attack. With the flying enemies though, they will always win the forward race, meaning that your main defense against them is not a forward sprint, but rather well-timed swerves when you see/hear one incoming, and I often found this to be surprisingly difficult. For a PS1 game, I really was impressed at the way enemies moved, and how reactive they were to what manoeuvres and actions I would make, be it a sudden movement or a well-timed gunshot. Speaking of guns though, oh boy did I not gel with the shooting mechanics at first. They pretty much work how you'd expect from a game of this era really, with the R2 button readying your weapon, be it a melee weapon or a firearm, and then the X button letting off an attack, be it a swing or a gunshot. Except, I kept finding that I was simply missing my shots, and not really knowing what to bloody well do about it. And the fact that the most common enemy throughout the first chunk of the game are your super mobile air screamers really added to the frustration. Sometimes I'd be facing something and they seem to be within distance, but I just miss several times, and what do you do there? You can't really aim. All you're doing is holding down the aim button and then hoping that Harry is actually targeting something, and hoping he's targeting the right something if you're faced with multiple enemies. I certainly did get to grips with the shooting more as the game went on, especially in indoor levels where there are no air screamers, dogs or apes, but I never felt particularly confident with the shooting mechanics throughout my first playthrough, and a lot of ammo got wasted. On my second playthrough though, I did two things. First, I turned on auto aim in the game's secret options menu. I've read online that auto aim is actually on by default in the North American version of the game. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's off by default in the PAL version. Another thing I did was toggle the view mode option from normal to self view. Folks, in my humble opinion, this is the goddamn way to experience Silent Hill's combat. By default, holding L2 allows you to swing the camera around to get a better look at your surroundings, which is useful, especially in combat when you've got winged ones and woof woofs, running and jumping and then disappearing out of sight into the fog. But changing this option to self-view allows for a nearly first-person camera view, which I think looks superb. You can activate it while running if you want, but in combat it is invaluable and looks sick as hell. Even with the game being 25 years old, it looks so good when I was blasting stuff away with this camera angle. I did have the auto aim on here of course, but even if it were off, it would make aiming significantly easier compared to the default view. And honestly, I really do think this should have been the default view. Combat went from being an area of uncertainty and discomfort for me in my first playthrough to feeling downright thrilling on my second. Now I know exactly what some of you might be thinking in response to that. You might be thinking, hey asshole, you're not supposed to feel empowered and thrilled with the combat. It's a Silent Hill game, you goddamn son of a bitch. And I get that, you make an excellent point there. However, as thematically appropriate as it may be to make shooting a significant pain in the arse throughout the whole game to enforce the idea that Harry is just some regular guy who's been thrown into this hell, I like what I like. It's not as if Silent Hill's combat is subtle either. Like I said, you'll often have a lot of enemies coming at you at once, and there were numerous occasions in the outdoor sections where I'd be running like hell with 4 or 5 screaming monstrosities trying to take a bite out of Harry's sweet ass. And given the choice between the default mode where the shooting can feel like something of a clunky crapshoot, or a mode where most of the time I knew exactly what I was aiming at and where the ongoing action looks awesome too, I'm going for the latter choice every time, please. Let's get back to our adventure though, if you can call this an adventure. The one and only lead we have on where Cheryl might be is that grisly alley from before, which actually lies fairly close to the cafe, and we can navigate to there with the help of the map of Silent Hill we got within the cafe. Maps are of course a staple in many survival horror games like Resi 1 and 2, which were already out on the PS1 at this time, but I feel that Silent Hill's map navigation is more iconic for whatever reason. I guess it's the organic way it's done, the way you just find maps for various levels lying in likely locations, and which also look like believable maps, and the way Harry marks off roads, alleys and doors depending on whether or not they're obstructed, accessible or locked respectively, or even if there was something noteworthy in a particular room that might be worth returning back to later, though do be aware that all of these maps are quite missable, as I discovered on more than one occasion. The next large section involves traversing through quite a large outdoor level, tracking down clues to Cheryl's whereabouts, with the alley directing you towards Silent Hill's school, specifically Midwich Elementary School at the southeastern corner of the map, though despite the use of the map, getting there is anything but some straightforward jaunt from A to B, even disregarding the continuous assaults from air screamers and dogs, because not only is the town immersed in a thick layer of fog, but there's also been some sort of cataclysm which has levelled many of the town's main roads, requiring alternative routes through to specific destinations. In this case, a note on the ground is found directing us to the doghouse on Levin Street. Just as with the childish scrawlings from the alley, these notes were also written by a child, clearly implied to be Cheryl, guiding her father along. Except for all Harry knows, Cheryl has never before been to Silent Hill, so why should she have any knowledge of these locations? The doghouse does in fact contain a key to the nearby house, though watch out for the dogs, leading you on to another jaunt around town, this time for 3 keys to unlock a rather well secured door leading to a garden, giving you more of an opportunity to get acquainted with this charming town. It initially seems like it might be a massive pain when you look at the supposed size of the explorable area, but before any road goes on for too long there will inevitably be a massive crack in the ground preventing any further progress in that direction, which, rather than feeling at all frustrating, actually felt kinda satisfying, because it effectively eliminates that as a viable direction, progressively narrowing down the potential areas where you might find what you're looking for, always with a corresponding mark to the map to let you know where you've already been. The rough locations of the 3 keys we're after are also marked on the map, of course. There's the key of the lion within the boot of a police car, and then there's the key of the woodman lying next to the severed head of a dog, itself conspicuously situated below an equally blood-stained basketball hoop. I can't see any significance regarding the name and location of the key of the lion, but this key is presumably a reference to the woodman from Little Red Riding Hood, who does in fact slay a wolf in that story, hence this grisly scene. As for the key of the scarecrow, well, although I'd gotten a wee bit pissy a few times already by this point with the combat, this was the first time I got actually annoyed and lost, because the map was telling me to look at the bottom of the traversable section of Elroy Street, and yet there was just nothing there. I tried killing the air screamer flying around here thinking maybe it would drop the key, but no. After about 20 minutes of running around like a moron, I came back here and turned out there was a wee bit to the side that was accessible via a plank of wood, allowing you to grab the key of the scarecrow, finally allowing access through the house on Levin Street and out into its garden, taking us into an alley at the other end past the broken roads, one step closer to Midwich Elementary School. Right after setting foot outside though, things suddenly go very dark. The same thing did of course happen back at the beginning, after Harry progressed further through that alley, but in this case conditions aren't quite so nightmarish. Rather, the main difference is that the fog is gone, instead replaced with an even thicker darkness, which looks pretty bloody awful actually. Your visibility is pretty much the same here as it was when it was foggy, except the draw distance is fully exposed here and it ain't pretty. Nonetheless, it still makes for an unnerving experience as you sprint southwards, past the even greater concentration of dogs and air screamers towards the school. One aspect of the experience that greatly enhances how unnerving the journey is the music, if you can even call this music. When Silent Hill is in its fog world state, things are almost always silent, apart from the sound of Harry's footsteps, the noises made by monsters, or the piercing static of the radio. But it's when the levels transition into being more nightmarish that the music kicks in, ranging from ominous to metallic and industrial to, in some cases, horrifying. Though there are a few actual musical tracks throughout the game which are an absolute joy to listen to, especially when they're sandwiched in between so much horrible noise. Don't get it twisted though, I may be using a lot of negative adjectives there to describe the music of Silent Hill, but that does not mean I don't adore this aspect of it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the music is a significant component of what makes this game such a classic, to the extent that I wouldn't want to play Silent Hill without these industrial dirges. The first taste of it you get here is great, but there are many more moments of musical brilliance further on in the game that I'll highlight as we get to them. The school is the first of the game's several indoor levels, with these being very different to the outdoor levels in several ways. For one, no air screamers or dogs indoors, ever, thank God. Furthermore, they're far more constricted, broken up and room-based compared to the streets of Silent Hill, which are much more expansive and open. Lastly, whenever you're in an outdoor section, it's always either to move from point A to B, or to fetch some clue or item. But with the indoor levels, you actually have to take your time more and observe your surroundings. Sometimes you will find yourself barreling through hallways and stairwells to get to a certain room, but rather than just moving through these places, you actually are properly engaging with them. Silent Hill is perhaps most well known for its foggy outdoor sections, but it's levels like the school where it really shines and exhibits truly tight level design with interesting ideas, details and puzzles. One aspect that does continue inside the school, however, is darkness, necessitating the continued use of the torch throughout. You can run around with the torch off if you really want, but it means that Harry can't interact with objects, even if they're right in front of him. The main reason Harry is here at the school is of course to find Cheryl, but both he and we are flying blind at this point, in an unfamiliar building in a very unfamiliar town, and indeed, conditions here are very unfamiliar. Mind you, one recognisable presence is that of the Mumblers, the same razor-clawed freaks who took Harry down back in the alley at the beginning, with these creatures being the main enemy found in the school. You'll be seeing them both in hallways and in rooms, and although the numbers in any one place range from 1 to 3 on normal difficulty, I swear I had 6 of these damn things coming at me at once in one room on hard mode, which can be problematic. Combat with one of them is much the same as combat with another though. 4 direct shots with the handgun and they drop to the ground, allowing you to run up and deliver a slightly goofy looking kick to finish them off. And by the way, that kick really does finish enemies off remarkably well, way more effectively than follow-up shots with your firearms. Not that you'll have anything other than the handgun at this point. In fact, there was literally only one single time throughout both my playthroughs where a kick did not finish an enemy off, which leads me to think that one time must have just been a bug. There's also the option of melee combat of course, though this was something I indulged in quite sparingly throughout my playthroughs, only really pulling out a pipe, axe or chainsaw when I wanted to mix things up a bit, because it's harder, though at the same time there's a higher skill ceiling compared to when using firearms. Harry's attacking animations aren't exactly the quickest, and there's always a bit of a delay between when you press the button and when he actually starts swinging or stabbing, and that actually matters a lot, because if your swing comes out a bit too late when the enemy is too far into their attack animation, you're getting hit or grabbed, neither of which you want to happen. Melee combat does feel surprisingly good if you manage to pull stuff off without taking damage though, hitting enemies at the right time to knock them out of their attack in some cases, or manoeuvring Harry accordingly for your beefier monsters who aren't as easily staggered. Honestly though, even though this is a survival horror game, it's really not that stingy with the ammo, especially for your handgun. That's not to say that you should stop and blast every living thing you encounter when working through a level, but there's really not a great need to be super conservative, at least on normal mode. The radio still very much comes into play in these indoor sections too, though in a slightly different way to when outside. When roaming the haunted streets of Silent Hill, the fog prevents you from seeing too far ahead, meaning the radio has a better detection range than you, alerting you of enemies lying beyond eyesight, though in a manner that's uniquely as unnerving as it is helpful. The same sort of principle applies in indoor levels, though your visibility isn't quite so restricted here, even with the darkness, not least of all because these spaces aren't as large, and so the radio mainly serves as an immediate signal upon entering a room to let me know whether it's safe or dangerous, in a more binary way compared to how it functions in outdoor levels. It still provides a great deal of tension though, literally every time you enter a room or hallway in fact, and these levels have a lot of rooms and hallways, and just because a room was devoid of monsters before doesn't mean it will always remain that way, and just because you cleared that hallway of 3 mumblers 10 minutes ago doesn't mean there won't be another 1 or 2 roaming around the next time you return back. Although it's unlikely to be immediately obvious, the steps required to actually progress through the school are outlined in the 3 bloodied notes found behind the reception desk at the beginning of the level, each of which provides you with indications on what to do and where and in what order, corresponding to which time is currently visible on the looming clock tower in the school courtyard. So at 10 o'clock, the alchemy laboratory. Gold in an old man's palm, the future hidden in his fist, exchange for sage's water. It's kind of written in a way where you could be forgiven for writing it off as enigmatic guff, poetic fluff, which might come to mean something later, but Christ knows what the fuck it's going on about at this point. However, in the lab equipment room you can find a bottle of chemicals, and in the chemistry lab right next door there's a model of an old man's hand clutching a gold medallion. So what the hell do you do here? I don't remember picking up a hand opener anywhere in the level. Well, the alchemy lab mentioned in the note corresponds to the chemistry lab. The gold in an old man's palm is the gold medallion, and Sage's water refers to, that's right, the handgun ammo. Sorry, I mean the chemicals. And the reference to the future being hidden in this fist refers to the time of the clock tower moving forward from 10 to 12 when you insert the gold medallion into its slot. Hey, pretty neat. Okay though, nothing that hard there, but what about the next hint, the one which brings us onto the first potentially problematic puzzle, a tale of birds without a voice. The alchemy note directs you towards the music room situated on the school's second floor, but it's not quite so straightforward from there, or at least it wasn't for me, because I could not for the life of me figure this puzzle out. There's a piano there with 7 playable white keys and 5 black, some of which play notes, while others make this noise. To accompany this, there's a tale written over some music attached to the blackboard to give you clues on what you're supposed to do with the piano, invoking different kinds of birds, 3 white and 2 black, with the text corresponding to the bird's position relative to each other, obviously meant to be interpreted in some way to figure out the order you press the keys in, except actually figuring this out was just beyond me. The thing is, it's a fucking piano, and so I was concentrating on the keys which played notes, thinking I had to avoid the duds. But then at the same time, for the dove text it specifically mentions that it's silent, so maybe I'm supposed to play a dud note to correspond with the dove's position. But then, it mentions that the pelican is greedy. Okay, why is that relevant? How do I interpret its greediness in respect to the keys? I'd played around with the keys for a while, but was honestly just fumbling around, moving back and forth between the piano to the clues to see if there was something I missed, and yes, there was. In fact, it's right there in the bloody name of the story, a tale of birds without a voice. Thus, you're only supposed to make use of the muted notes, narrowing your choice down to the extent where it's much easier to figure out the correct order. The puzzle initially really frustrated me that I couldn't work it out, especially with it coming really early in the game, but in the end I really only had myself to blame for missing an important clue that was staring me right in the face. Anyone else struggle with this one? Please someone say yes, it'll make me feel better about myself. The final clue is by far the most significant in relation to this story, but as with many aspects of Silent Hill, you'll probably only pick up on it on a second playthrough, once you're aware of important details which only get revealed further down the line, though rest assured that I will be making the relevant callbacks to previous details as the video goes on. I don't want to just splurge the whole plot all over you too soon, you understand. 5 o'clock, darkness that brings the choking heat, flames render the silence, awakening the hungry beast. Open time's door to beck and pray. The only thing that you might have seen around the school that might in any way pertain to heat and flames is the boiler down in the basement, which can now be activated. That's not the sound of something burning away, by the way, but the sound of something awakening. The encounter with that certain something isn't quite here yet though, because first we need to pass on through the small door below the clock tower, taking Harry up a ladder then out the other end to descend back down again to a new location. Or is it? Your very first taste of the Otherworld was back at the beginning in that alley, with the darkness and the gore and the monsters and corpses, but the school is where you first actually get to explore and traverse through an Otherworld level. The town of Silent Hill effectively has 3 states, or 4 if you include the nighttime states. There's the fog world which, while being terrifying in several ways, is still vaguely grounded in reality. Yes, there's a thick, nearly supernatural fog, the roads are completely destroyed, nearly all the people are gone and there are monsters everywhere, but other than that everything's normal. There's also, however, the Otherworld state, where the environment becomes considerably more nightmarish in every regard. In this case, it's like the clock tower acts as a sort of dimensional rift, allowing you to get to the Otherworld by physically moving through one space into the next, into a sort of mirror dimension of the fog world, but as the game progresses, Harry has less and less control over when and how he jumps from one realm to the other. There's also, of course, another state, called Nowhere, but we'll get to that later on. There are several noteworthy features of the Otherworld versions of the game's levels, but an immediately apparent detail upon emerging out into the courtyard area is the enormous circular symbol drawn onto the ground. At this point in the game, we don't know what the hell this means, but we'll be seeing it a lot in other levels too, in particular throughout the places around Silent Hill associated with the presence of Cheryl, or at least the little girl who seems to look kinda like her. Also, the music's back again, at least in the courtyard section. It was actually present in the regular version of the courtyard too, with the track gaining additional layers each time you progress the time forward on the clock tower, but in the Otherworld section, it goes from being disturbing and quite threatening to sounding downright overwhelming, instantly increasing the feeling that you have ended up in a place where everything is wrong. Very wrong. Your map for the school still applies here, with the levels seeming to have the same basic layout with its 2 floors and a basement, but upon actually entering the building from the courtyard, shit's fucked up. The place is still lousy with mumblers, but it's the aesthetic that's completely shifted. The regular version was hardly ideal in appearance, having some disturbing details here and there, even disregarding the monsters, but now the wooden floors are replaced with rusted iron grating, and the walls are thick and brown with rot and mould. Some parts have just had their aesthetic shifted from clean and scholastic to rotten and dreadful, but other rooms are profoundly transformed, like the room on the first floor just adjacent to the storage room, which just looks like a regular space in the normal version, leading to a jammed door. But in the Otherworld, well, I don't remember that being there. Probably my favourite change of the lot is the room behind reception, which features a pretty disturbing painting, especially disturbing when you consider its placement inside a school of all places. But come back here in the Otherworld and the image you saw on the painting is now a physical door, complete with the 2 chained up corpses suspended at either side, morbid gate guardians. Corpses are a common theme in the Otherworld, and you'll see numerous other displays of death, strung up in different poses at various stages of decomposition and mutilation, though in a way that seldom seems random, but rather as if there's some meaning or purpose behind these poses. This level actually behaves quite anomalously in one case. Here I am at a closed off section of a corridor at the southwest of the 2nd floor, but walk in the girls' bathroom, the interior of which is adorned with yet more chains, blood and bottles of some unknown substance littering the ground, and then walk out again and now you're down on the 1st floor. Don't know why this happens actually, but it's something of a mindfuck and I really like it. One very important object you can find in the 1st floor boys' toilets is the shotgun, the second of the game's 3 core weapons, which, needless to say, will come in handy. It essentially operates identically to the handgun, still allowing you to move while aiming, but dealing much higher damage. Also, even though it's clearly a sawed-off shotgun which should only be able to hold 2 shells, it can hold 6. Hey, I'm not complaining. The extent of the school's transformation really does feel like it's a new level you're exploring, with sections that were closed off before now being explorable, and vice versa. And there are of course more puzzles to get stuck on, which is great, like the one on the rooftop where a key is stuck down a hole, so you turn on the water via the nearby valve to flush it down to be collected below, except the water's draining into a hole situated below the key. So why not jam that red rubber ball we found earlier into that hole so that the water flows past it and onto our key, at which point you need to think about where it might have ended up, that being a corner of the courtyard. Nice wee puzzle there, and surprisingly conventional and grounded considering we're in an unplumbed nightmare dimension of blood and rust, though sadly it's not all balls and holes, cause then we get to the fucking gate puzzle. Half an hour, by the way. One room that stumped me at first in the regular version of the school was the locker room. You hear a very scary noise upon first entering, though the source of it is out of sight due to the shape of the room, but as you might have expected, there's something inside one of the lockers. Probably just a cat or something, right? Oh, it actually was a cat. It seemed like there should have been something else I was supposed to do here though, what with Harry having added a question mark on the map, but nope, for as much as I tried hugging every surface and mashing the X button, I came no closer to anything. However, if you come back here in the Otherworld, again you hear something banging on a locker door, and this time you know it's not going to be a wee kitty cat, and indeed it is nothing. Oh well, I guess I'll just look. Just like we had those notes behind reception back in the regular version of the school, there's another important piece of reading material to be found in the library, an old fairy tale in fact, telling a story of a hunter who endeavoured to set off and kill some monstrous lizard, and upon finding the beast, taunted it, making it lower its guard and open its mouth wide in fury, whereupon the hunter loosed an arrow into its maw and killed it dead, and indeed, after passing through that gate puzzle I mentioned before, well I guess that kinda looks like a lizard. Again, the imagery here is not at all random. The burning body on display at the centre of the arena amidst these counter-rotating mechanisms is very relevant to a particularly important character from the game that we've not been well acquainted with yet. As for the stomping monstrosity following Harry around the arena, well, this is the first of the game's 5 bosses. And although this is our first time seeing this thing, we actually heard it back when we turned on the boiler in the regular version of the school. Mechanically, it's a very simple fight. You just create some distance, then turn back and fire off a few shots. It's not terribly quick, but it's also not quite as slow and lumbering as it first seems, and it only gains speed as the fight drags on. Mind you, the fairy tale we read specifically mentioned attacking the beast when its maw opened up, and indeed, upon dealing enough damage, honestly, I fucking love this moment. Not only the grotesqueness of its vertically split mouth, but also the way the music kicks in after the silence of the first phase, apart from the stomps of the beast and its guttural growls accompanying every attack. Very cool touch here is the splatters of silver drool which drop down from its mouth, and as you'd expect, you have to bait it into an attack then immediately walk backwards to avoid it, because it's actually a one-hit kill if it lands. This was a really easy boss on normal mode, and it went down with just a few shots from the shotgun in phase 2, but I actually died about 7 damn times on hard mode. It's a bit tankier and took a wee bit of getting used to timing the backstep out of the range of its mouth crush. Really simple boss, but I thought it was great fun. Nothing complex, but its design is classic Silent Hill, and the sound design massively elevated the experience for me. Both the whack of music and then the music, and also those monstrous low-pitched noises the lizard makes. Directly after killing the lizard, you get a short cinematic showing a girl standing in the darkness, before the background is illuminated and you see she's leaning on a boiler. The same one we earlier activated to awaken the beast, and a very important detail indeed. The girl doesn't say anything, but her demeanour makes her seem benign enough, and indeed, Harry wakes up in the boiler room, not knowing how he got there or what's going on, but more importantly, he's back in the regular version of the school. For now, the nightmare is over, and the catalyst for that seems to have been the defeat of this especially nightmarish monster. There's a key being left behind on the floor too, labelled K. Gordon, and if you check on the list of teachers at the reception desk, K. Gordon's name and address is on there, though prior to exiting the school, Harry hears church bells in the distance, meaning there's another person out there, maybe even Cheryl, and with the Balkan Church being the only labelled church on our map, we've got our destination, with the section of town where the church is located being accessible by passing through K. Gordon's home. It's business as foggy business, moving from the school to the house, though an interesting detail about the rear entrance to Gordon's home is the blood splatters on her garage. As far as I know though, despite her obviously having some significance to the story, there's really no more information on what the dealio was with this unseen teacher, at least in Silent Hill 1. Exiting Gordon's home takes you out into a new section of Silent Hill within the southeastern quadrant. I wonder if this part of town's going to be a little bit more chilled. Nope. If you're on your second run through the game, Block Street here is of particular interest because it's where you can pick up a hidden weapon. There's a chainsaw store over by the side of a ruined road, as in it only sells chainsaws, very specific. But you can't actually get the chainsaw yet, but head on over to the gas station lying a bit further east near the raised bridge and you can grab the gas canister which only appears in New Game Plus and beyond. And with this, you can go back to the chainsaw and fuel it up. Oh my god, this thing is impossibly sick. I swear I'm going to use this for the rest of the game. Bit loud though. Actually, fuck this. What a bloody racket. I ended up liking the idea of the chainsaw far more than actually using it. Unlike with the game's other melee weapons, you can't actually move when using it. It wasn't really doing as much damage per hit as I thought it would, and most of the time I still got hit even whilst attacking, and so I just switched back to my guns. I could have fueled up the nearby rock drill instead, which is another bonus weapon, but you only have enough fuel for one bonus weapon per playthrough, so not too sure how this thing feels to use. Within the church, a new character is introduced, that being Dahlia Gillespie, who makes some pretty strange, twitchy facial expressions during her introductory cinematic here. Her model actually looks quite hideous, if I'm being honest. She spouts off some enigmatic hocus pocus to Harry here and gives off bad vibes, but she's the only one thus far who seems to know anything about his daughter, directing him towards the hospital and also gifting him with a strange object she calls the Flowros, which she claims can break through the walls of darkness and counteract the wrath of the Otherworld, before leaving Harry in a state of increased confusion, though at least we have our next destination. Alchemilla Hospital, which is located in central Silent Hill, just to the east across the bridge, which we can now lower with the key we got from Dahlia. The hospital is our next main level, though before getting to delve into its clinics and wards we meet yet another new character, Michael Kaufman. Our introduction doesn't go quite as smoothly as it could though. In fact, he literally shoots at Harry at point blank range upon him entering the door after suspecting him to be another monster like the one lying dead and bloodied at his feet, though thankfully he misses somehow. Kaufman is the director of Alchemilla Hospital, but he has very little to offer Harry in the way of explanation as to what's actually happening to Silent Hill, or why, though this meeting does provide the player with a nugget of information regarding Harry's past, as he tells Kaufman that his wife died 4 years ago, though you can get a glimpse of him and his wife in the intro cinematic, picking up a bundled baby off the ground within some twisted part of the countryside. Kaufman comes across as quite abrasive and unpleasant here, but not overly hostile, apart from the whole firing a gun at Harry at point blank range. And he will appear a few more times as the game goes on, not to mention playing an important role in which of the 4 endings you get. Speaking of the endings, not far from the entrance to the hospital, you pass through a kitchen area where you can pick up a plastic bottle, presumably to be used for some puzzle further on in the level, I assumed. Nearby again though, in the director's office, and keep in mind that Kaufman, who we just met, is in fact the director of the hospital, you can see a shattered glass vial on the ground with some weird red gloop splattered everywhere, prompting me to think, oh, and then just go about my business in the hospital and never come back here for the rest of the playthrough. Except, see that plastic bottle you just picked up? Yeah, you're supposed to use that on the red gloop and then save it for later, because it is in fact a main component for getting the best ending, though you've no way of knowing that at this point. I don't know though, it just didn't occur to me to use the bottle on the liquid here. It's all spilled, it's fucked. If I see a load of liquid on the ground, my natural inclination isn't to try and collect it into a goddamn bottle. Anyway, rant over. Or at least it would be if I didn't make another big mistake at the start of the hospital level. So, earlier on in the video I mentioned that the game's maps are completely missable. They don't just automatically go into your inventory when you enter a new district or building, you need to find them, though they're never really that difficult to find and are usually very near the start of whichever level you're on. Well, despite that, I totally missed the map for the hospital. It's situated behind the reception desk to be collected just after meeting Kaufman, but I just missed the door leading to it and never picked it up. The thing is though, I didn't think I'd actually missed a map. I just thought that this was the game's natural progression of difficulty where you've got the map in the school, but now you're on the next level, so no map for you. As it happens, I was partially correct in that assumption because there is indeed a level where you don't get a map, but we're not there yet. This is a larger, more complex level than the school too, having an extra floor on top and a larger basement, so suffice to say I had a pretty bloody difficult time playing through the hospital with only my wits and my memory to guide me. I wouldn't say it was frustrating or anything, but it was more challenging than it needed to be. First step is to turn on the generator located in the basement, powering up the elevator, which is another key feature that wasn't present in the school. Interestingly enough though, while you can move up to the second and third floors, the doors leading into their corridors are locked, but despite the fact that we're still in the regular version of the hospital, with the word regular there being in inverted commas. See? Upon getting back into the lift, we call them lifts in the UK by the way, there's now a button there to go up to the 4th floor, which was not there before, and upon ascending up to that floor, we get another vision of the same girl we saw leaning on the school boiler, walking into some derelict antique shop. And just like that, Harry's back in the Otherworld. With the school we got a chance to explore both versions of it, but you're chucked into the Otherworld at a far more urgent pace here, where you don't get to experience the level's normal state first as a reference point. Thank God I have my map. Your main enemies in the hospital are infected nurses, who in comparison to most other creatures in Silent Hill 1, still retain a portion of their human aspects and characteristics, though with the lurid addition of a writhing, wriggling parasite attached to their back, forcing them into an exaggerated posture, though they are still able to run and even slash at Harry with a scalpel. You'll also find similarly afflicted doctors too, who behave in much the same way as the nurses, except wielding full-on butcher knives rather than dainty little scalpels. And at this point it's clear that the form and symbolism associated with the monsters you fight holds some significance. The mumblers / grey children in the school are of course a cruel perversion of the form of a child, and the same applies here in the hospital with its roaming gangs of parasitised medical staff, though it's not entirely clear whether these beings are actually what remains of the town's inhabitants after the cataclysm which brought Silent Hill to its knees, or whether they are new creations made to resemble the town's inhabitants, but with various nightmarish twists. I'm far more sympathetic to the latter idea, because if these beings were merely transformed from the actual people, surely there'd be more of them rather than the town being largely deserted. And while you can discern what the dog creatures, mumblers and medical staff are based on, what the hell did the air screamers used to be? Birds? Mechanically, I really didn't find the doctors and nurses to be difficult to fight. In fact, even though this is around the halfway point in the game, I think I'd say they're the easiest enemies in the game, certainly more so than the mumblers, who have a really annoying habit of dive grabbing you as you try to run past them. You do have your smaller creeper enemies too, who go down far easier, but that's only if you manage to hit them in the first place. Some of my most frustrating moments in the game were when I'd enter a room and have a swarm of these bloody things on me, with nary a chance to fire off a shot or create any space between me and them. Just like the previous Otherworld realms, relative silence gives way to ominous ambience, with various disquieting tracks playing and shifting depending on where you roam. Some rooms even trick you into thinking something's going to happen by changing the music to something that sounds like it would fit very well as an accompaniment to an enemy encounter, but then there is no encounter, but it still feels like there should be, and it's all very uncomfortable. It makes it so that even your moments of relative peace are still fraught with tension. Then you'll enter a room like this, where the aural ambience becomes far more akin to that of the slow swelling breath of some beast, rather than the faster paced keys and chords of the rest of the hospital. Shit like this was awesome for 25 years ago, and it's still awesome today. The first half of the hospital involves collecting differently coloured plates, each of which feature different characters from Alice in Wonderland. The turtle, the cat, the queen and the hatter. The blue turtle plate is just sitting, waiting to be picked up in the men's toilets on the 3rd floor, while the gold cat plate is simply attached to a wall in a room on the same floor, and the red queen plate is sitting on a desk in the director's office where the shattered vial was in the regular version of the hospital. The green hatter plate is a bit more tricky though. Earlier on in the level, you will have found a blood bag in a storage cabinet. I tried to see if I could combine the blood bag with the plastic bottle, but as we all know by this point I was barking up the wrong tree there. In one particular room on the 2nd floor though, the green plate is attached to a wall. Same as how the gold one was from before, except there are 3 disgusting creatures which look like snakes with their heads cut off, preventing you from grabbing it. This is actually one of just 2 times in the game where you see these things, and in both cases they're actually completely invincible. If you try using the blood bag when near to these things though, Harry will chuck it to the side, prompting them to begin lapping it up, allowing you to collect the plate. Believe it or not, I discovered this completely by accident. I assumed I had to do something elsewhere first before the snakes would, fuck off. But thought I'd have a go at trying out the key items in my inventory first, and turned out the blood bag worked. See, I ain't too bad at puzzles. Ah, fuck. Nah, to be honest, this one didn't take me all that long. In fact, it was a pretty excellent wee puzzle. Got to use the writing on the paper stuck to the adjacent wall to work out which indentations to put the plates in, with each line corresponding to a particular colour. So, clouds flowing over a hill corresponds to the colour white, which is already there, meaning you know that this is the starting point and that every subsequent line refers to every subsequent indentation moving clockwise from this position. Sky on a sunny day is blue. Tangerines that are bitter is orange. Lucky 4-leaf clover is green. Violets in the garden is violet. Yeah, no shit. Dandelions along a path is yellow. Unavoidable sleeping time is black, the colour of death. And liquid flowing from a slashed wrist is red, the colour of the plate of the queen. Opening the way forward to a new corridor with rooms containing the basement storeroom key and some alcohol. No, all we need is some coke. The drink, I mean. The basement of the hospital is a very significant place in this game, though even with the key to the storeroom, there doesn't seem to be all that much of interest down here. However, there's a secret passage hidden behind a movable bookshelf, beyond which lies a vined-up grate leading further down still into what is the real basement of the hospital, accessible after dousing the vegetation in the alcohol we just picked up and then setting it alight. And from the darker, even more dangerous corridor that follows, Harry enters into this room.
Looks like someone's been here.
So now we know the name of the girl we've been seeing visions of up until this point, and we can also discern that whoever she is, she was at one point a patient within Alchemilla Hospital, and if the layout of this Otherworld version of the hospital is to be trusted, she was hidden down in the depths below the basement. Also, observe the bottles of drugs and the cabinet in the corner. These seem to be the same types of bottles seen around the Otherworld version of the school. The key to the locked up examination room on the first floor is also here, and within that room Harry meets the last character still to be introduced, Lisa Garland. Unfortunately, just like with Sybil and Kaufman, Lisa really doesn't have any answers, claiming to have been unconscious when it all went down, before waking up in the midst of all this hell. One very important detail with her though is that thus far she's the only character we've seen in the Otherworld. We encountered Sybil in the cafe, Dahlia in the Balkan Church, in the Balkan Church, and Kaufman on the ground floor of the regular hospital. But Lisa is right here with us in the Otherworld, and what's more is that she's both kept her wits about her and her humanity, in stark comparison to the crazed and infested doctors and nurses running around the rest of the hospital. Harry attempts to ask Lisa if she knows anything about the isolated room down in the basement, but she seems to be ignorant of whatever's down there, or at least she thinks she is. Though when he tries to bring up the picture of Alessa by the bed, loud sirens begin to play in his head, causing him to collapse to the ground before abruptly waking up, again in the regular version of the hospital. Though unlike with the school, the transformation from one state to another here was not triggered by the defeat of a boss. We immediately have our second encounter with Dahlia here too, who does her usual thing of providing us with more questions than answers, never directly answering Harry's questions, and using unfamiliar phrases in her speech, as if she's delivering some demonic church sermon. Dahlia mentions the crests we've been seeing about town, like the large one in the school courtyard, referring to them as the Mark of Samael, the king of all demons, who is also referred to as the Angel of Death. She leads Harry to believe that the drawing of these crests, that word's difficult for me to say, crests, are what's causing the darkness, and that it's spreading and must be stopped, though offering no further guidance in regard to Cheryl's whereabouts, other than leaving us with the antique shop key. Recall back to the brief vision we got of Alessa walking into the antique shop, meaning that this is our best current lead, at least after picking up the map for the hospital behind reception, you know, the one for the level I just completed. Surprisingly, it's a pretty straightforward journey from the hospital all the way to the antique shop on the northern end of Simmons Street, as opposed to the usual rigmarole of half the roads being destroyed, though I think this is the first time in the Fogworld state where we get musical accompaniment. It's a great track too. It resembles the sound of someone crying, except heavily distorted, yet I find it oddly melodic too and ambient, and I really like it. But then I like a lot of fucked up music. Despite my radio going off a couple of times, I didn't run into a single enemy on this journey, but the bizarre music still made the run a memorable one. At first, the antique shop seems about as small as you might expect an antique shop to be, but just as there was a significant area hidden behind a cabinet in the hospital, the same is true here with a pushable wardrobe exposing a hole in the wall. Though for the second time we meet Sybil Bennett, who is not able to leave town due to the state of the roads, and furthermore apparently all vehicles located within the boundaries of the town have ceased to function. Sybil does claim to have seen a girl, but she wasn't sure if it was Cheryl or not, and furthermore, this particular girl appeared to pass across a destroyed road over thin air towards the lake. A notable detail about Sybil is that thus far, even despite all the monsters running around, she's still skeptical of any supernatural goings on. In fact, when Harry brings up the Otherworld, she has absolutely no idea what he's even talking about, suggesting that up until this point at least, Harry seems to be the only one experiencing these spontaneous shifts from one realm to another. He carries on through the hole, but leaves Sybil to stand guard at the front of the shop, and at the other end comes across a strange altar of sorts to some demonic winged entity. Sadly though, this was the PS1, so the image of the demon is a bit too pixelated to look all that great, particularly the head, which is drawn in a way where it looks like a red version of the grey fox cowl from Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Or maybe it's just me. There's really nothing else to be done here though, other than picking up a new melee weapon and observing the disturbing wall scrawlings, though when Harry tries to leave, the altar goes up in flames. Cut to Sybil standing outside the hole, who enters through to see if Harry's okay, only to find that he's completely gone, having again passed over into the Otherworld, for the first time letting us know that at least up until now, it's not the town that's changing from one state to another, but rather Harry is being warped from one separate realm to another, while Sybil remains in the fog world, despite her standing very close by. We're not immediately chucked into a new level yet though, because before that there's a sort of dream sequence with Lisa, who shares some crucial information on the nature of the town and Dahlia Gillespie. She says although Silent Hill is now known as a resort town, popular with tourists for its tranquil scenery, before all the development started, people here used to worship some strange cult, though as the population grew and newcomers entered, it seems to have been forgotten about, or at least people stopped talking about it so openly. Recently though, there have been several strange deaths associated with those responsible for the town's development, like the mayor, perhaps having something to do with the cult. As for Dahlia, Lisa tells Harry that her child died in a fire years ago, and that she's been crazy ever since, though no one really sees her these days. Midway through the conversation, as usual, the scene abruptly shifts away to Harry waking up in the Otherworld version of the antique shop, leaving you wondering whether he was actually speaking to Lisa there or whether that was really just a dream. The game occasionally makes it so that you're never quite sure what's real and what's not, and whether all this might just be a twisted fantasy in Harry's mind while he's lying in a hospital bed in a coma after a car accident. In any case, we need to go and see Lisa again at the hospital to ask how we can get to the lake, that being where Sybil claimed to last see a girl heading towards. But now, it's not just some level we're in the Otherworld version of, but the town itself, with the concrete roads and pavements now replaced with those rusted grates, and the fog replaced with darkness. Worse still, there's a new enemy in town, these ape-like creatures who are referred to as rompers. You still have your dogs and air screamers, but the rompers act as an additional, particularly dangerous hazard, exhibiting a distinctly alarming way of moving, bounding after you with great leaps, always putting them terrifyingly close to Harry, even if you're sprinting forward. Annoyingly, they employ leaping grab attacks, sometimes holding Harry in position for other rompers to launch in with another attack directly after, dealing higher damage than any other enemy thus far. Thankfully though, healing resources really weren't a concern for me for the vast majority of my playthrough, with health drinks, first aid kits and ampoules being liberally scattered around the world. Compared to say, the Resident Evil games on PS1, getting hit really isn't a big deal because you've got a decent amount of health, there's plenty of healing items and you have unlimited inventory space. Even on hard mode, the only time I felt a bit of a strain on my healing supplies was for the final boss. Yes, the excellent final boss. The only way onwards from this part of town is through the torn open gate of the nearby town centre, and a fun wee detail I liked was the Vestal Gigastore just to the right of the entrance. This is obviously a play on the old Virgin Megastores you used to get. We actually used to have one of these near the entrance to the shopping centre in my hometown too. Anyway, when you try and go up the stairs, these monitors turn on, showing some pretty sad images of Cheryl asking where her dad is, followed by sequences of what I assume are alchemical symbols. I don't know. Who do you think I am, Max? You can also see these so-called Crest of Samaels appear amidst the symbols, the one Dahlia claimed was leading to darkness overtaking the town. On the upper level, you can go into a jewellery shop for some ammo and the opportunity to save. There's nothing else noteworthy about this particular room for now, but I'm showing it here because I will reference it again later. At the other side though, we can see what looks like a couple of grub caterpillar creatures feeding on the husk of a person, but getting closer makes the floor drop out from under Harry, leading to the second boss, and my favourite boss in the game. Much like the lizard, it's really not a very interesting encounter mechanically, but again, it's the goddamn sound. That simple rhythm playing in the background is genius. And those distorted noises the creature makes as it emerges out of the ground are great too. All you can do is bait it into an attack and then move out of the way, firing off a few blasts of the shotgun, or the pistol if you're a bit low on shells, though it also fires projectiles at you to catch you off guard. Another very cool detail with this thing is its blood. You can change the colour of enemy blood in the extra options menu, which I did a couple of times for fun throughout the game, but regardless of what it's set to there, this boss will always have this pinkish purple blood, which I think looks really great, even if the boss's actual visual design isn't terribly memorable. To be honest, I wasn't massively impressed with most of the visual designs of Silent Hill 1's monsters. They're certainly not bad, not by a long shot, but when you compare them to the kinds of creatures introduced in the subsequent 3 games on PS2, they're on the weaker side of the spectrum. I guess it's not that I find their designs unimpressive, but rather, with the definite exception of the rompers, I just didn't find the enemies to be very scary or disturbing. Though I will say that their associated sound effects certainly made up for that to a decent degree, both in combat and before it. Your radio may broadcast an enemy's presence nearby, but the sound of something's wings beating or feet stomping amidst the fog is great horror. Although I found the lizard boss to be a fair degree more challenging on hard mode, this wasn't the case for the caterpillar. It was still pretty damn easy, though rather tanky. Ah well, I've beaten it now, let's take a look around the arena, then skedaddle. Well, they could have at least signalled to the bloody player in some way that this weapon was here to be used, you dumb game. Well, I've got no defence then. The rifle deals the most damage compared to the handgun and shotgun, but its biggest drawback is that you can't move while aiming, meaning that it's probably not the best choice when fighting at close range. Mind you, thanks to its damage potential, things tend to go down pretty damn easy anyway. It has the slowest reload speed too, but very rarely in my playthroughs did I even witness the reload animation for any of my weapons, because in this game, conventional reloading is for chumps. If you're down to the last bullet in your gun, simply go to your inventory where the action is paused and reload there, and voila. I'll be honest, for as helpful as this is in the heat of combat, it's pretty odd that you can do this. I mean, why even have clip sizes in the first place? But let's not nitpick. I'm not a nitpicker. In fact, I thank you for it. Thank you, Team Silent. After exiting the centre, it's a fair old distance back to Alchemilla Hospital, though bear in mind that Silent Hill is still in Otherworld mode, featuring some awesome visuals like these wind turbines at either side here. I love the focus on mechanisms and metal within the Otherworld, because it makes it feel like there's some horrific but ultimately unknowable purpose and function to it all, rather than there just being random disturbing imagery everywhere for you to gradually become desensitised and disinterested in. What's more is that there's yet another new enemy, the Night Flutters, which are essentially a buffed up version of your Night Screamers from earlier, meaning that your trek from this corner of town to the other is going to be a noisy one, and you might even come across more of those strange crests here or there. Lisa is still secluded in the hospital examination room, though her demeanour here is very different to when we last saw her in that sort of dream sequence. She tells Harry that with Bachman Road being destroyed, the only way to the lake where Sybil saw that girl is through the sewers. That sounds fun, right? Lisa also says that she's scared and doesn't want Harry to leave, though rejects his offer to take her with him, saying,
No, somehow I feel I'm not supposed to leave this place. Oh, Harry, I'm so scared. I'm cold.
These 2 lines of dialogue are very important, as is the fact that Lisa is still the only other person we've seen in the Otherworld, but for now, we need to leave her be. Interesting thing to note upon our departure from the hospital is that even though we left through the same door we entered from, the outside is altered from just moments before, meaning this realm isn't exactly stable. Following these stairs up to the roof leads us to the third boss, the moth thing. Good opportunity to pull out the rifle, though the lack of mobility it allows for does make it tricky to evade the boss's stings and projectiles. Once again, really nothing too complex about this fight, though I do like how you have a choice of 2 spaces depending on which you feel more comfortable manoeuvring through in relation to the movements of the boss. Either the longer section below or the higher part where you can use the water tower as cover from its attacks. Not a difficult fight, and I never came close to dying on either normal or hard. The creature's attacks just don't seem to do all that much damage. Upon its defeat, the state of Silent Hill immediately shifts back to the fog world. At first, I was a bit confused by the lack of consistency here, because back when we beat the wizard, the world shifts from the other world. But then, upon beating the hungry caterpillar, that does not happen. But after beating the moth, it does happen. Then I realised that this is the caterpillar boss. We didn't kill it in that first encounter, it escaped and then transformed into a beautiful moth. I thought it was odd that we fought this third boss so soon after the second, but yeah, this is why. Maybe this was obvious to most people, but I felt like Albert fucking Einstein when I worked it out. Where's my Nobel Prize? The game does something pretty uncharacteristic here after leaving the area and straight up warps you directly to the entrance to the sewers in a different part of town. But that also means that we have to do the sewer level now. If you've never played Silent Hill before, or it's been a while and your memory of its levels is a bit hazy, or should I say foggy, then imagine this... Alright, that's enough. Picture, if you will, in your mind's eye, what a sewer level would be like in this game. Well, you're correct. It's that. It's dark, dingy and wet and cavernous and crawling with the latest enemy type, which I'll refer to as Scratchers, though they remind me of the Sahagins from Final Fantasy X. The footage here is from my first playthrough when I was getting a bit bored of using my handgun and thought I'd try out that axe that I picked up in the antique shop. I'm not great at games. I know I said there were two basic level categories, indoor and outdoor, but I guess the sewers are kind of a fusion of the two, because this really doesn't play at all similarly to the school or hospital. It's mostly just a case of running through it and avoiding the enemies. There's only a couple cases of having to use a key, and it's really not all that long. Speaking of the enemies, I was really surprised to see that even when you transition through a door or go up or down a floor in a level, the enemies in that zone you just left are still there and can move about and everything. They don't seem to be able to attack or be attacked when outside your immediate zone, but I thought this was a really cool touch, and adds to that feeling of tense horror when you turn back and see a swarm of these things still trying to get at you through the gate. There's really not all that much to say about the sewers. I can't imagine it ever having been considered a highlight of anyone's playthrough, but I do think it's fine, in the sense that I think the level does what it sets out to do. It's dark, oppressive and hostile, and has you running scared through it at times, just like the town sections of the game do, except with a more constricted layout and a dimmer aesthetic. No, the sewers weren't an issue for me. No. The new section of Silent Hill you emerge out into at the other end though, the resort area, well, this pretty large section was probably my least favourite part of the whole game, but once again, it's not because it's shit, but rather because I missed another fucking map. You can even see me walk past it several times here and pan the camera over it, but I just didn't see it. And that's a damn shame, because without a map, this part of the game is pure frustration. Again though, just like with the hospital, I didn't think I'd missed a map. I assumed that you were just supposed to be running blind here in the darkness, trying to figure out where to go, with legions of creatures hot on your tail. In fact, even on my second playthrough, I initially missed it. It was only after I was hopelessly lost and ended up back at the beginning here that I noticed the map posted up on the sign and realised how dumb I'd been. If you want though, you can actually skip a lot here, because just like with the scooping up of the red gloop back in the hospital, what you do in the resort area has an effect on which ending you get. Mind you, I didn't look anything up on my first playthrough, and so I just organically ended up following all the steps by chance in my desperate efforts to find a bloody way onto the next part of the game here. First off, got to head to Anne's bar, where we encounter Kaufman for the second time, who's being nailed by a mumbler. After his rescue, again, he doesn't really shed any light on the situation other than expressing a desire to escape from all this madness, though a noteworthy line is when Harry asks him if he knows a girl called Alessa, to which Kaufman replies,
Do you know a girl called Alessa? No.
Spoiler alert, he does know a girl called Alessa. Here you pick up a key to room number 3 from the motel, and a receipt from a store called the Indian Runner with a code written on it. You can use this code on the padlock at the side of the store, at least after spending 8 minutes desperately trying to find it in the dark like I did because I had no fucking map. And within there's a grocery list on the wall which has another 4-digit code on it, this being for the rear entrance to the motel. There are also a couple of other details here though, like the diary talking about strange people coming to collect packages, also mentioning someone called Norman, that being the now deceased owner of the motel we are soon to go to, and this all pertains to Silent Hill's illicit drug trade, specifically of a drug known as PTV, which gets referenced by Sybil on occasion and in other notes. PTV isn't necessary for understanding the main plot or anything, but it's an interesting sort of side intrigue that does come into play for certain characters, both on and off screen. In fact, you can literally find bags of PTV inside the locked safe here. Apparently the key is somewhere in this room, but I somehow managed to miss it on both playthroughs. Can you imagine me miss an important item? With our new code, we can get into the hotel from the back, and then from there go to room number 3, which we can unlock with the key dropped by Kaufman in the bar. At first, I was confused because there was nothing in here, but for the third bloody time, we need to push a cabinet. It was reasonably obvious the previous 2 times, but I only discovered that this thing was pushable by desperately mashing X around the room. But there's a key nestled in the crack, which can be retrieved via the use of a magnet picked up just a bit earlier, which can then be used on a compartment on the motorcycle within the motel garage, yielding a vial of some familiar red liquid, the same liquid spilled on the floor back in the hospital. Kaufman abruptly bursts in though, and grabs the vial back from Harry and is very pissed off, and then leaves. I was pretty damn confused by all this, because at the end of it we're no better off than we were before. We did all these steps for that vial, which immediately gets taken away, but we actually just fulfilled one of the 2 conditions for the good plus ending. If you don't do all these steps, then you'll never see Kaufman again, but now that we rescued him and found the red vial for him, he will turn up at the end. From here on, or even before all that if you're not interested in which ending you get, we can move further westward through Sanford Street, at which point once again we get a transition to the Otherworld, only this time it's a bit different. Whenever it happened before, it was a case of Harry either being flat out warped there, or in the case of the school, it was like he physically travelled through to the Otherworld via the wormhole in the clock tower, which allowed access to the more nightmarish mirror image of the school. But at this point, it's like reality itself is being transformed into the Otherworld, like both states are combining into one. And indeed, from this point on, you'll never actually return to the fog world version of the town. In fact, things only get more hellish, and this trek towards the lake make for the most perilous one yet. In lots of these clips, you can see me furiously sprinting away from hordes of enemies, because bear in mind that you don't actually get rewarded in any way for killing something, and sometimes enemies even respawn, and so I thought, screw it, I'll just run. But in retrospect, I think I could have made things easier if I did stop more to take things down, especially if I wasn't exactly sure where I was going. If it's a relatively straight line from A to B, then it's not so bad, but if you're having to do some actual navigation in the outdoor sections, then it really sucks not being able to breathe for dogs, rompers and air flutters swiping and grabbing at Harry's head. The pier by the lake leads to a boathouse, though far from serving as a peaceful, buoyant bastion against the carnage and chaos just outside, there's immediately a brutalised body situated right at the entrance. I hope you like alliterations. Though inside, we once again come across Sybil, who still somehow seems sceptical that there's anything remotely dark or strange or supernatural going on, despite the fact that for the first time, she too is now in the Otherworld. Harry does say a key phrase here though, saying that it's like the town is being overcome by someone's nightmarish delusions, because in fact, that is exactly what's happening. Dahlia also appears in the boat and warns that a demonic influence is swallowing up the land, and that the further the crest of Samael is to being complete, the closer the town and the world comes to the end times, describing what sounds like a literal hell, dwarfing even the conditions outside in terms of horror, death and torment. It's a pretty terrifying image she paints, though it's slightly undercut by the pretty bad voice acting. As for Harry's daughter, well, according to Dahlia, Cheryl has been possessed by the demon, bringing the world closer and closer to the apocalypse with every crest of Samael she draws around the town, and that Harry must stop her in order to save the world and save his daughter. Dahlia directs him towards the nearby lighthouse and also the amusement park, though Sybil volunteers to check the latter location for us. Before Dahlia leaves, she instructs Harry that he'll need to use the Flowrose, that strange object she gave him back at the Balkan Church, to stop the demon. Indeed, at the top of the lighthouse, a Lessa can be found, and the largest crest of Samael yet has been drawn on top, bringing the town one step closer to doom. Though before Harry can stop her, she fades away, leaving us with nothing left to do at the lighthouse. Sybil still hasn't returned to the boathouse by the time we get back, meaning that our next stop is the amusement park that Dahlia mentioned, located further west along Sanford Street. Unfortunately though, with this being the Otherworld, the road is obliterated, but good news guys, we can go down into the sewers again, though descending down the ladder prompts a short cinematic of Sybil being knocked over the head by an unknown assailant. Furthermore, we see even more crests down here, and more nightmarish imagery, indicating that the demonic influence is both spreading and intensifying. I wasn't massively thrilled to be heading down into the sewers again, but if anything, it's even more straightforward than before. In fact, it's essentially a sprint past a ton of enemies, and can be finished in just a few minutes, though with a clanging, clanking, industrial strength banger playing over it all, really ramping up the feelings of intensity. It's remarkable just how strong an effect music can have on the feel and even quality of a level or enemy or boss encounter. At the other end of the sewer, we reach the Amusement Park, which is exactly as eerie as you'd expect an Otherworld amusement park to be. It's surprisingly rather light on actual enemies, though you'll still hear plenty of static from your radio, as caused by these kinda cute, shadowy penguin things. You actually first see these little fellas back in the school, but they act the same here, though the fact that the only 2 levels in the game where you see them are places typically associated with children is quite uncomfortable. Even so, they can't hurt you, and nor can they be hurt. They even slowly fade away when exposed to torchlight. However, it's not these things we're here to see, and nor can we stand around all day and gaze longingly at the rides, the fun rides, because on the merry-go-round we get our 4th boss fight. So this is a very important boss if you're interested in which ending you get. We already fulfilled one condition when we saved Kaufman, but recall the red gloop you can bottle up in the hospital. Well, that comes into play here. How on earth you're supposed to know that, I have absolutely no goddamn idea, but if you get close to Sybil here and go into your inventory, you can use the unknown liquid on her, instantly ending the fight. Like I said earlier though, I didn't pick up the liquid on my first playthrough, and so I just fought Sybil normally because I didn't know any better, but I did get it on my second run. Also, even if you do pick it up and realise that you're supposed to use it here, it can still be really janky. In fact, I still have no understanding of what position I'm supposed to be in relation to Sybil to be able to actually use it. I tried it from every distance, angle and circumference, but it just wouldn't work, to the point where I genuinely thought the game had bugged out on me and that I would not be able to use it. In the end, this turned out to be the position I had to be in before it worked, when I was facing away from her at a fucking 90-degree angle I don't understand. If you do need to fight her conventionally, then she can make for a fairly tough fight. When you're in range, she'll pull out her pistol and shoot, dealing a ton of damage per hit. You can run off when she raises her weapon, but it makes it difficult to actually get in shots yourself. She'll also occasionally teleport away with a pretty creepy laugh, after which she can be found sitting on one of the horses. Deal enough damage and it does become a bit easier though, because she throws her gun away and goes in for more melee attacks and grabs. If you did not use the red liquid and have to blast Sybil away, then she dies in a really gruesome cinematic, and that's that. On you go further into the amusement park to look for Alessa, but if you do use the red liquid, then a squirming parasite emerges out from her to be stomped on. Kinda resembles a more slug-like version of the small shadow beings at the start of the level, but it's also clearly the same sort of thing growing out of the backs of the doctors and nurses back at the hospital, and it turns out that whatever these things are, and whatever that red liquid was, they don't like it. Also bear in mind that Kaufman has more of this substance. Thus, with Sybil saved, the second of the 2 conditions for the best ending have been fulfilled, though you also learn a very important detail about Harry and Cheryl that you don't get at all if you kill Sybil, where he reveals that Cheryl isn't actually his biological daughter, but rather he and his wife found her as a baby 7 years ago at the side of a highway. You can see this in the game's opening cinematic, though his wife died a few years later due to an illness. Prior to this moment, we're totally in the dark about why Cheryl, this seemingly random little girl, has been taken, but now we know there's more to the story, and that she has some as yet unspecified connection to the town of Silent Hill. Just ahead, Harry again counters Alessa, though this time she does not get away, with him being in time to confront her, thinking that she is the demon Dahlia has blamed for the creation of the surrounding hellscape, and the one who's taken Cheryl. In response to this accusation, she repels but doesn't kill Harry with some ambiguous force, though as she's walking away, the flower rose given to us by Dahlia activates, reconfiguring itself in mid-air before stunning and weakening her, prompting Dahlia to once again show up, revealing that this strange Alessa girl we've been pursuing is actually Dahlia's daughter. She's been using Harry to get close to her, close enough for the flower rose to awaken and render Alessa vulnerable so that the next stage in Silent Hill's transformation can be brought about, the third state, simply and ominously known as Nowhere. In between that though, Harry once again finds himself in a sort of dream sequence with Lisa, though it's preceded by a very strange scene of her creeping up behind him as if something's taking over her. She explains that she went down into the basement, the one where we found Alessa's portrait next to a bed, and that even though before she couldn't remember ever having been down there, she got a weird feeling, almost as if she had been down there before, and that something of great significance happened in that basement that she just can't quite recall. She runs out of the room here, though we do see her again further on in Nowhere. So, what the hell is Nowhere? Well, it sure as hell doesn't resemble the Fog World, though it is very similar to the Otherworld. The difference is that even though the Otherworld was essentially a nightmarish version of the real world, it was still mostly the same spatially. Yes, there were anomalies, and yes, some roads from one place to another were either transformed or lost entirely, but the configuration of the town and of individual levels was still mostly the same. With Nowhere, however, that is not the case. For the most part, it's based on the Otherworld version of the hospital, but with rooms from completely different places thrown in. For example, the jewellers I mentioned back in the town centre is here, as is a classroom just like the ones found in the school, except in this case featuring a solitary desk, complete with abusive messages crudely and cruelly carved into the wood. The first room of the antique shop is here too, complete with the same clock and room layout, and on the third floor of Nowhere you can also find a very similar sort of shrine to the one found at the back of the antique shop. There are even aspects of the hospital from before that you couldn't interact with back then, but which play a part in puzzles here in Nowhere, like the steel plate fixed to the wall by screws that can now be removed with a screwdriver that you did not have before, and at the end of one corridor there's a lithograph with text on it that was completely blank before. Thus, even if you previously developed a good grasp of the hospital's layout, while it will help for Nowhere, there's still a strong element of unfamiliarity here. And something that really enhances that effect is that here, for the first time, there actually is no map. And it makes this into a difficult level to navigate, because although many of its rooms are very distinct from one another, many of its corridors are not. One slightly sad aspect is that there are no new enemies here. Nowhere is of course heavily based on the hospital, and as such, the main malefactors here are your infected doctors and nurses who behave identically to the way they did before. I don't really mind content being recycled to some extent, especially if they mix it up somewhat like they did here, but a new, especially monstrous enemy type would have been a welcome addition to the level. You progress through Nowhere using a sequence of keys, all of which are named after strange alchemical terms like Ophiel, Haggith, Aratron, etc. And all this progressive unlocking of more of the level allows you to pick up another 5 special key items to be used on a strange door in a child's room, Alessa's room in fact, requiring the crest of Mercury, the dagger of Melchior, the Ankh, the amulet of Solomon, and the disc of Ouroboros. It's anything but some straightforward journey from symbol to symbol though, with some very important plot details mixed within, not to mention a couple of pretty great puzzles, and also this puzzle, the Grim Reaper puzzle. Like I said, this lithograph was here before, but now it contains written guidance to be used in conjunction with the other lithograph round the corner to solve the Ouija board lock preventing access through the door. You ever have a puzzle where you just find yourself looking back and forth from the hint to the puzzle to the hint to the puzzle to see if there's something you're missing out, but you just cannot figure it out for the life of you? Yeah, that was this one for me. It mentions the list of people on the Grim Reaper's list is to be lined up in order of age. Okay, the ages are all at the left hand column, so I can work out the correct order, I can do that much, but then what the hell do you do from there? The Ouija board has all the letters of the alphabet in it. Do you write out every name in order? Surely not. Okay, but what about their initials? Nope, doesn't work. How about writing out the full name of the youngest person there? Nope. The oldest? Nope. Okay, I will try writing out all their names in order. Okay, not that either, obviously. Well, the solution to the puzzle is that if you line them up in order of age and take the first letter from each of their 4 names, you get the word alert, and that's the code. There were some puzzles in the game that I got stuck on for a while, but where after figuring them out, despite how frustrated I may have been by the end, I laughed good-naturedly, and conceded that yeah sure that actually was a good puzzle, and that it beat me straight up. But I didn't enjoy this one at all, even after discovering the solution. Just thought it was kinda lame and arbitrary. Despite what I think of that though, within this door we get another encounter with Lisa, who by this point is nigh on hysterical with fear and panic, saying that she's actually the same as the creatures lurking around outside, the other doctors and nurses. And indeed, after Harry shoves her away, she begins to transform into something resembling the others in one of the best scenes in the game, which is massively and emotionally enhanced by the accompaniment of a beautiful guitar track, made all the more pure and powerful when set against this sad scene, and especially when compared with the industrial noises which make up the other 90% of the Silent Hill soundtrack. I love the way it carries on playing for a few minutes even after the scene is over too, and a good thing too, because if you return back into that room, Lisa is gone but her diary is lying on the ground. So the truth is that Lisa Garland was very well acquainted with the basement of the hospital, more so than any other nurse in the hospital in fact. There's a massively significant newspaper article from 7 years ago in this room up on the 3rd floor of nowhere, though for whatever reason it literally won't show up sometimes. Here I am in this room on my first playthrough where it wasn't on the desk at all. Then on my second playthrough it did show up, and I don't know why, except I neglected to capture footage of it beyond the first page of the article, like a dumbass. But it reads, "Fire broke out in town, 6 homes destroyed, charred body of Alessa Gillespie, age 7, found in aftermath. Cause of fire currently under investigation. Then, investigation shows source as basement of Gillespie home. Blaze now believed caused by malfunction of antiquated boiler." So there are several things to unpack here. For one, what else happened 7 years ago? That is when Harry and his wife found Cheryl on the side of the road. We don't know where they found the baby, but it seems like a pretty safe assumption that it was near to Silent Hill, meaning that Cheryl has some profound connection to this place and to Alessa. Secondly, the blaze was believed to have been caused by a boiler. Cast your mind back to the school boiler. We activate it to awaken a beast, and in that arena where we face it there's a bound blazing body in the centre, as if a sort of sacrifice, and after the lizard is defeated, we see Alessa leaning against the boiler in that cutscene. Furthermore, and most importantly, even though the article says that Alessa's charred body was found, we know from various scenes, files and clues around Nowhere that this was not the case. Even back in the Otherworld version of the hospital, we were able to find a solitary bed beneath the basement with a picture of Alessa by the side, but if they found a charred dead body on the scene of the fire, why would she have a bed dedicated to her in the hospital, and why would it be so tucked away? Either the body found at the scene of the fire was someone else, or it was a cover-up manufactured by the cult. In fact, behind the door of Aratron, there's a version of Alessa's basement room where we see a ghostly scene of Dahlia, Kaufman and 2 cultist doctors within who deliver yet more crucial plot details. Not only was there a terrible fire 7 years ago, but it was started deliberately by Dahlia as part of a ritual to awaken some terrible god demon inside Alessa for her to give birth to further down the line, bringing about some terrible new age of dread. Except, as Alessa was being burnt, she split her soul in half, resulting in the creation of Cheryl, who was then found and spirited away by the Masons. This, however, meant that Alessa's soul in its current form was not powerful enough to bring about this new god, and so as if Dahlia wasn't evil enough already, she made sure to keep Alessa alive, which should have been impossible considering the extent of her burns, keeping her down in the basement of the hospital where no one but the cult knew about her, trapped within her own subconscious in a never-ending nightmare, a nightmare which nourished the demon growing inside her. This is where Lisa comes back into the story, because she was assigned as the sole nurse responsible for tending to Alessa, feeding her and changing her bandages and such, forced into this responsibility by Kaufman. I mentioned the drug PTV before. Well, Lisa was a PTV addict, and Kaufman happened to be one of those responsible for its distribution around Silent Hill, acting as Lisa's supplier to feed her addiction so that she'd carry on taking care of this scorched girl who by all rights should be allowed to die. Lisa's diary that she leaves behind after the scene of her transforming sheds some pretty disturbing light on her mental state at the time, describing how she kept seeing insects in the room even though all the doors and windows were shut, and how blood and pus would come out of the faucet. Then her diary ends with, "Need drug, help me." The thing is though, the Lisa we've seen throughout this story isn't actually real in the strictest sense, but rather she's a sort of spirit or a creation of Alessa's. You can get clues of this by the fact that she's unable to leave the hospital, can't traverse to the fog world, and how she describes how cold she is. She's a very tragic character who meets a horribly tragic end. After realising that Alessa had split her soul, Dahlia casts, as she rather lamely calls it, a magical spell, which over time drew Cheryl back to Silent Hill, with her begging Harry if they could travel there on vacation. But it was actually Cheryl's return that caused this massive transformation in the town, as her soul returned back to Alessa's, effectively resulting in the loss of Cheryl from that point on, who was essentially just a fragment of another being, but also cyclically projecting Alessa's never-ending nightmare out onto the town, destroying the roads, causing the disappearance of nearly every person in town, and leading to the creation of savage, rotten monsters born of her damaged mind. Thus, what Harry has been experiencing, particularly when transported to the Otherworld, is Alessa's inner nightmare, now made into an outer nightmare for all to experience. You see brief ghostly images of Alessa as a child in some rooms of nowhere, like of her huddled up in a room with large eyes crudely graffitied on the wall, and in the altar room on the 3rd floor, but you can also enter a representation of her room, adorned with cards and drawings scattered on the ground, her dress hanging on the wall, and a collection of moths, perhaps being some sort of inspiration for the moth boss we fought near the hospital. At the end of the room though, there's a door which all 5 collected artefacts must be slotted into, leading on to Alessa's home before it was burned down 7 years ago, complete with a flashback of her and her mother, showing the moments where Dahlia comes up with the idea to sacrifice her own daughter via ritual immolation, and descending the stairs here afterwards lead on to the final encounter. Depending on which of the 2 aforementioned conditions pertaining to Sybil and Kaufman you did or did not fulfill by this point, the following cutscenes and even the final boss will vary, but I'm going to be discussing the good plus ending where all conditions were fulfilled because it yields the most information regarding the plot as a whole, right from the beginning in fact. Dahlia talks about the talisman of Metraton here, which is actually a misspelling of Metatron, an angel from Abrahamic scripture, though what she's referring to here are those same symbols we've been seeing everywhere, which she before called the crest of Samael, blaming them on the darkness overtaking Silent Hill, when in reality, Alessa's projection was travelling around town, drawing these so as to bring annihilation to the town. Not to bring about any sort of new demonic age, but rather to stop it, to destroy Silent Hill before she's forced to give birth to the demon as Dahlia had been planning for years. Except Harry was manipulated by Dahlia into stopping Alessa with the Flauros, preventing the completion of the talismans of Metatron. Thus, Alessa's soul is now complete, meaning the god worshipped by their cult can be birthed. By the way, that mutilated figure you see in the wheelchair is actually Alessa, with the girl to her left being a psychic projection of her made possible by Cheryl returning to Silent Hill, not unlike how all the monsters from her agony-addled mind were also projected onto the town, and even Lisa Garland. Because we saved her, Sybil has made it here and attempts to stop Dahlia, but her bullet has no effect and she's thrown asunder, much like how Harry was at the amusement park earlier. Before our very eyes, we see Alessa and her projection combine into one being, transforming into some seemingly angelic entity known only as the Incubator. Though because we also saved him, Kaufman enters the picture here too, successfully managing to shoot Dahlia. This might seem a bit surprising, considering we saw Kaufman standing alongside the other cultists in that ghostly flashback scene from earlier, plotting along with them to bring their plans to fruition, but it's clear that whatever Dahlia promised him, whatever he thought he was going to get out of helping them, this realm of torment is not what he had in mind. Kaufman pulls out the red vial he took from Harry earlier at the motel, with a now panicked Dahlia calling it a Glaufatus, named after a real-world pink herb of the same name. As for what on earth it does, well, think back to when we used it on Sybil. It effectively exorcised whatever evil entity was inside of her, repelling it from her body, and exactly the same thing occurs here, except in this case, it's not a small slug thing to be crushed underfoot, but a demon, or god, or angel, or who knows what. So this being's official name is the Incubus, coming forth from the back of the Incubator and serving as the game's final boss, at least after taking out Dahlia with a violent bolt of its red lightning, setting her on fire and immediately ending her life as its first action in the world. As for what I think of this boss, well, that depends on whether we're talking about normal or hard difficulty. On normal, it kinda sucked, but I had enough health items and ammo to take it down. I got hit by virtually every one of its attacks because I couldn't quite work out how on earth to not get hit by them, but I was able to tank it. On hard mode though, well, this was my single least favourite part of the entire game. The Incubus's lightning is really awkward to avoid. You might think that sprinting as fast as you can when you see it charging up for its next attack will do the trick, but it won't. It will hit you nearly every time, and it hits very, very hard. I had a modest supply of healing items by this point, but definitely not enough that I could tank very much. The actual strat for avoiding its bolts, and the only strat that I'm aware of, is to immediately start running in a tight circle when it starts gearing up for the next attack. It doesn't look all that hard, but you need to be perfect with it. If you're not turning hard enough, then you'll be hit. And you also need to watch out for the sides of the arena and those annoyingly placed poles in the middle, because if you run into anything, then you're getting hit, guaranteed. Look, I won't lie that it felt damn good when I finally landed that finishing shot, and I think the Incubus's visual design is fantastic, the way it looks like a really fucked up version of Baphomet, but I really didn't enjoy this boss experience on either difficulty. It neither looked nor felt enjoyable or interesting having to literally, not figuratively, run around in circles, and I look forward to never having to fight it again, please. With the death of the Incubus, all that's left is the angelic being from before, which is now devoid of the demon which had been gnawing at its mind and soul for 7 years, though it's not long for this world, slowly fading away, with the Otherworld born of its nightmares also starting to collapse around both it and Harry. With its final act, it produces a child, just like what happened 7 years ago previously with Cheryl, except this one does not have half a soul, but rather it's a reincarnation of sorts of Alessa and Cheryl in a sense. As it begins to fade away even more, with the last of its strength, she creates a portal for Harry, the child and Sybil to escape from, though let's not forget about Kaufman. Recall that Kaufman was the one who blackmailed Lisa with her drug addiction, forcing her to keep taking care of the husk of Alessa for all those years, and so with her, or her spirit's final act before the end of this world, Lisa makes sure Kaufman follows them all into the void for his past transgressions and his role in bringing about this nightmare. The final cinematic which rolls after the end credits shows Harry and Sybil holding the baby, exactly as he and his wife did 7 years previously. I guess we can only hope that this child's life will be more peaceful than Cheryl's. And that's the end of the game, and what an ending, and what the fuck is this? Stop it. Who's this now? No. Well, you fucked that up, didn't you? A blooper reel at the end of this game? Let's pretend that never happened. I didn't know exactly what to expect from Silent Hill upon booting it up again after 20 whole years. Well, I know its aesthetic and its vibes, and I knew that it was widely considered to be a PS1 classic, but I didn't quite know whether it would hold up, or how I'd find the plot, or how the combat would feel, and whether the level design would feel outdated, and everything else. But folks, I loved my time with this game. There were definitely some rough patches throughout my first playthrough, but as you've heard, usually when I'd find myself not enjoying some section of a level, it was because I just missed something, and so my second playthrough was a blast. I don't usually have the urge to play through games again right after finishing them, but I absolutely wanted to here, and I'm really glad I did, because I noticed a ton of details I'd missed the first time round, to the extent that I found myself constantly taking notes during earlier levels and cutscenes now that I understood their significance. One of the aspects that impressed me the most about the entire experience was the soundtrack, which I think must be one of the most effective soundtracks of any game I've ever played. Not the best, mind you, I'll take Final Fantasy X soundtrack over Silent Hill's any day of the week, but the kinds of sounds produced here and the way they were used was incredible, the feelings of dread, panic and discomfort they evoked. I also loved the plot. It didn't seem like it was going to be all that interesting at first with the rather weak voice acting, and there's also the fact that the game is very light on plot for quite a while after you leave the cafe at the beginning, but the story told here was incredibly deep, detailed and disturbing, and overall remarkably well crafted, and there are aspects to it that I didn't even touch, like all the alchemy stuff. Again, I had a brilliant time playing this game, and I now consider it one of my favourites. Of course, there are still a lot more Silent Hills to go, though I'm mainly interested in the other 3 Japanese developed ones on the PS2, and I'm already much more experienced with 2 and 3 compared to how I was going into the first game. I'd like to put out retrospectives of all those games next, but we'll see. It kind of depends on whether anyone watches or enjoys this video. Before I split, please allow me to give a final fond thank you to my kind patrons for their support for the channel. And on that note, cheers for watching and cheerio.